I'm Michelle Storer. I am a Senior Business Director at Hayes Education. We are delighted to welcome you for this evening's author event with Louisa Reid. Hayes have been collaborating with Joy and Tricia from All Around Reading for many years now, bringing a range of unique opportunities to people working within schools to access high quality free CPD. We're really happy to provide these sessions as a way of giving back to the schools and the school communities that we work with. We're passionate about inclusion and the impact that reading for pleasure has on young people's later life chances. So as well as kind of providing access to awesome award-winning authors, we use these sessions to share current research findings, provide resources, signpost additional reading that people can access after the sessions, but also we focus on a range of highlighting a range of books that represent children and young adult literature in a range of themes such as race, gender identity. We've looked at refugees, homelessness, and this evening we're looking at misogyny, consent and toxic masculinity. So quite meaty topics that we look at, but we find that using books and reading a really good way to tackle and open up conversations about these subjects. So hopefully you'll find this really, really useful. On to this evening then, living in the northwest of England, Louisa Reid, who's with us tonight, writes primarily for young adults, although her novels are widely read by adults too. She is an English teacher 3 days a week, and this evening we're going to be looking at predominantly Louisa's recently published verse novel, Activist. So what we're going to be exploring is how schools can facilitate difficult discussions around consent and respect, how schools can combat the rising tide of misogyny, sexist bullying and fear of sexual violence, how to create safe spaces for disclosure, and how to empower girls to speak out. Along with Joy, Tricia, Louisa and myself, we're joined this evening by Kezia Featherston, an experienced teacher of English, current head teacher at Q3 Academy Tipton, which is a fully comprehensive secondary school in the West Midlands. Kezia is strategic leader and co-founder of Women Ed and a member of the Heads Round Table. So lots of experience and lots of great people here to talk about this topic this evening. Please do put comments and make comments and ask questions in the chat. We've already had a couple of questions in advance that we're going to talk about and discuss later, but please do feel free to add comments and things into the chat, which we'll monitor. And yeah, that's it. The session is being recorded. We'll be forwarding all these slides and other bits and pieces, resources, probably tomorrow, along with the recording. So don't feel that you have to make loads and loads of notes. We'll be sending all of those to you. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Joy, who will take things from here.
Lovely. Good evening, everyone, and thanks again to Hayes for allowing us these opportunities. I think our subject today couldn't really be more topical with all the Andrew Tate stuff that's been in the media. And it's certainly a topic that maybe would help Dominic Raab understand misogyny a bit better. But anyway, let's get started. I wanted to share some of the sort of background to the situation. And this slide is really about just to highlight how slowly things move in terms of action, really, by the powers that be. Nearly 10 years ago, this report, Sex Without Consent, I suppose that is rape, a report of the Children's Commissioner, which grew from the inquiry into child sexual exploitation in gangs and groups. But they kept coming across all this evidence about forced or coerced sex by young people against young people, and just people being very casual about it. Because rape they generally saw as something that was done by a stranger, which involved high degrees of force. So sex without consent, where the parties knew each other, was completely different, apparently, in their perception. And the victims, usually a girl, but could be boys, invariably blamed for their own assault. And the report found that by far the most significant influence on how young people understood consent was all around gender and constructions of gender, particularly masculinity. And all of the young people referred to the double standard, you know, which rewards young men for having sex, but rubbishes women who do so. And looked at the role of celebrity role models and obviously pornography having a huge impact. And this report recommended enhanced teaching about consent and relationships and you know, discussion of gender bias. And yet 2016, the Women's and Equality Select Committee report on sexual harassment in schools, 59% of girls and women aged 13 to 21 said they'd faced sexual harassment at school in the previous year. Almost half of them said they hadn't learned how to tell when a relationship was abusive, hadn't been taught about consent. And this important report recommended national guidance for schools on an effective all-school response. It also recommended that Ofsted should begin assessing schools on how they deal with reports of abuse and harassment, and that classes in relationship and sex education, RSE, should become a statutory requirement. But all of these changes took years. And meanwhile, 2017, that was when the Me Too movement really took off on social media following, you know, celebrity prosecutions and things. But eventually in 2019, the Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance was published, and in fact has been updated in September 22. And the Ofsted inspection framework was updated in September of that year. But in June 21, Ofsted revealed only 6% of inspected schools had actually reported on recording of these incidences, and 46% of schools said they hadn't recorded any incidents, and 48% just ignored the request. So not very good in terms of response. June 2020 was when the Everyone's Invited website was set up. Soma Sara, a 22-year-old UCL graduate, started gathering anonymous accounts of sexism and sexual abuse in schools. And in March 2021, there was the high-profile terrible murder of Sarah Everard, and that caused an absolute inundation of reporting on this website, and it implicated some of the country's most prestigious schools, perpetuating what Sarah called the rape culture. By this, she means the normalization of sexist jokes, sexual harassment, and online abuse. They released in June of that year a list of 3,000 English schools that had been named in these testimonies, which is around 1 in 10, I think, of state and private. So it did look as if a Me Too style reckoning was going to take place for British education. And indeed, there was an emergency Ofsted review in June 2021 of sexual abuse in schools and colleges. And in September, the statutory compulsory RSE curriculum was in fact introduced. So the Ofsted report published these sort of details, statistics and figures, which are incredibly shocking. I don't know if you can actually see the small writing at the bottom, but the pale blue is boys, the dark blue is girls, and it's reporting on incidents like unwanted touching, feeling pressurized to do sexual things they didn't want to, sexual assault of any kind, unwanted or inappropriate comments, rumours about sexual activity and sexist name calling, which is over 90%, happens, you know, a lot, or sometimes between people my age. Absolutely shocking. And indeed, this report had some fairly, you know, hard-hitting recommendations. It said that schools and college leaders should assume that abuse and harassment is happening in their school, even if they hadn't received any reports, and should be introducing a whole school policy to deal with them in any case. But what I found particularly interesting is, it's not surprising, this was picked up. There were loads of media stories about this Ofsted review, but in fact, it generated a full fact evaluation of the news coverage, because most of the reports hadn't actually read this Ofsted review report particularly carefully, because what it didn't do was actually measure the actual prevalence of issues like this. What it was doing was asking teenagers' opinion. So this was what students of this age thought was going on, and not actually whether they themselves or even their friends had experienced it. But the thing is, there is plenty of full-factor proved evidence out there, one of which is this table comes from research published by the Girl Guides Association, and that is fully accredited and shows, quite frankly, horrifying scale of harassment for girls, what they're facing. I mean, by the time they get to 17 or 18, 83% would be experiencing some or all of any of these things. Very aptly, I think, titled the report, "It Happens All the Time." The report did look at sexual harassment outside school as well, and you get the picture of just how much this impacts on the everyday life of girls and women. 80% of all of them felt unsafe when they were out on their own, increasing to 96% by the time you're 17 to 18. And as a woman, that's something it definitely resonates with me, even now at my age. And there's real evidence too from another fascinating report, the D-Shame project, which was a collaboration between Denmark, Hungary and the UK. It was looking specifically at online abuse, but all of the responses acknowledged how much overlap there was between the online harassment and, you know, real life crime. They summarized it into, in this slide and the next, you will see 4 main types of harassment and abuse. These two, I think, are the ones you see most commonly talked about, reference to, very sadly, in reports of suicides and why these things happened. You know, it will often be the sharing of images without permission and sexualized bullying. But the comments and the figures, I think, speak for themselves. Really, frankly, appalling. And the other 2 main areas were, you know, actual exploitation and coercion, and the unwanted sexualization. You know, before you're of an age really where, you know, you're making choices about your own online image, people are doing and saying and sharing things which you have certainly not given permission for. And one of the most, for me, one of the worst aspects of this D-Shame project findings was this graphic, because it seems as if the young people didn't feel there was any point in seeking help, not just that there were barriers to seeking help, but it was their reasons for not telling a teacher or not telling the police or not, you know, doing the official reporting on social media. I think there is a prevailing opinion that this is how life is. There's nothing we can do with it. We just have to put up with it. And I think that more than anything else shows us that we certainly can't do that. It is the responsibility of everyone who is safeguarding children, whether in home, in society, or indeed in schools. The 2022 updated guidance, Keeping Children Safe in Education, I think this quote says it all. You know, there's such a danger in dismissing this behaviour as normal, accepting it as normal. This is just a laugh, you know, because it does lead to a culture of normalising abuse. And I think that's what we all have to work and struggle to avoid. There are so many more issues that I could have referenced, but I just hope that you find our resources list where there are links to all sorts of different reports and research on and helpful, you know, places where you can find support and strategies and guidelines and lesson plans and all sorts of things gathered together in our resource list. and also suggestions for wider reading. Which brings me nicely, I think, into the main bit of our session, which is to, let me just stop sharing my screen. That's it. Which is to talk to our esteemed, acclaimed YA author, Louisa, author of this fantastic book, which we were talking just before this session started, and Michelle was saying how she'd been rereading it over the weekend, and it really made her blood boil, and it does have that impact on all of us. Louisa, would you kick off perhaps by telling our audience just a bit more about yourself as an author in your books, but specifically about Activist and your inspiration for writing it?
Thanks, Joy. Absolutely. So, as you say, as an Activist is the kind of book that makes your blood boil and makes you want to take action, I hope. And it absolutely comes from a place in me that is that kind of rage and frustration and wanting to say something about this and not to forget. I mean, how can we ignore it? It's there, it's everywhere. I teach girls in a girls' school. I have 2 daughters of my own. I've worked in various settings actually as an English teacher, single sex, boys and girls, and you know, seeing for myself sometimes some of the atmospheres that can prevail in boys single sex schools. I remember when I was teaching an A-level class and we were looking at unseen texts, and I brought in some Angela Carter, the wonderful feminist writer, and it was provocative extract, absolutely, from The Passion of New Eve, but I wanted to create and provoke conversation with these young men doing their A-level English literature about feminist issues and feminist writing and thinking from that point of view and perspective, and they point blank refused to read the text, would not engage with it at all. And that just kind of raised for me how this conversation needs to be had, and looking to find ways to raise it, but also for the girls that I teach, thinking about wanting them to be shown in literature. They can find themselves, their problems, their difficulties, and if they feel shamed or silenced by things that have happened to them, say, well, look, here we are, these are people going through exactly that, and follow their journey, find solace here, find comfort from it. That we do know you're there and we want to talk to you, we want to hear your voice. So as you were talking about, Joy, there's the whole background to Time's Up, Me Too, Everyday Sexism Project, Everyone's Invited. All of this has been going on for years now, and that kind of shocking impacts it's had for parents, teachers, young people themselves, as we become more and more aware of how this issue is in every sort of, it seems to be everywhere in all settings. It feels every month a new area of that society is coming forward and saying, yes, we have this problem in our setting also. So that was bubbling away in my mind before I wrote Activist. And there was an individual student who I taught who was such a strong young person, and she was very much engaged with the Greta Thunberg Friday strikes for the environment. And even though she often went about the things she did in ways that school found questionable, I admired her passion for causes that she believed in, and I wanted to write a character who had that passion for her causes. And Cassie in the story is very much that. She's known as somebody who stands up for things and speaks out and fights back, probably someone very different to myself, because I've always been quite a timorous person in some ways, and a bit, oh, I don't want to upset anybody. So it was great for me to write this character who really didn't care about upsetting people. She was going to speak her truth, as the saying goes, and she was going to put it out there and not be afraid. I admire that courage and bravery that so many young activists show, and the fact that they are so resilient which is another term which comes with a lot of complex ideas attached to it, but they keep going and won't be silenced. And that's Cassie, really. She's going to do whatever it takes. And some of the things she says in the book and does in the book are debatable and questionable. She has a little rant about Jane Austen at one point. That's not me talking. I love Jane Austen, but this is a young person trying to sort out their way, their place in the world and how everything fits together. And she's not always perfect. She is flawed, but she's her heart is in the right place. And while all of this was going, I was thinking all of this, there was also this kind of backlash against feminism that's been brewing, and this sense that there were young men out there who really felt, as I said about the boys in Highgate School that didn't want to read Angela Carter, that really felt that feminism wasn't for them. Now that's going back to the year 2000. So 23 years later, I think it's become even more of a thing, perhaps. And I was very interested with this teacher who was at Eton, Will Noland, who produced the Patriarchy Paradox YouTube video. And the furore surrounding that was really fascinating to me, and played a part in my writing the story as well. How these ideas about the kind of woke nature of feminism and the stoking of anti-woke sentiment in boys is happening in our society. And you mentioned Andrew Tate, of course, and that's become more and more apparent, hasn't it, and more prevalent. So these were all the ideas really that were feeding into my writing. And I don't think any of this has gone away since I wrote the book, probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago. We're still dealing with that. And if not, it's become, if anything, it's become much more of a flashpoint, really, where there is a lot of anger and the feeling that young men have that their perspective isn't being taken on board, that they don't matter, that they're not allowed to express what they think and they feel. I think this is a big problem that we're becoming more and more aware of as the conversation goes on. So the story has within it good, strong male role models. And that is, for me, so vital. Cassie's granddad, for a start, he's on her side all the time. Her useless, druggy brother at the start, he undergoes this kind of character transformation, this arc where he begins to see that activism actually, well, yeah, I thought it was boring, but it's giving me meaning to my life when I join you to fight it back and be involved in a cause. And there is more to life than sitting on the sofa and playing computer game or whatever else. The boys in the school that stand at Cassie's side. So it's not, I hope it's not a book that just says all young men are a waste of space and pointless and useless. We've got these strong, positive male role models there, but there are also the toxic boys that will do anything to make these girls' lives a misery. And there's an element that they find it fun, but it's also about power. Fundamentally, it's about, this is our territory and you've come into it and you're trying to make your mark, and we don't want you here because this is our world and you have no real value in it. So there's a lot for me to explore, and I just really enjoyed writing the book because it was an opportunity for me to let out my anger and my rage, of course, but an opportunity for me to speak to that group of young people who I think want to talk about this stuff. And from my own teaching in English classes, it's all girls, and they will talk for ages about feminism and inequality and toxic masculinity. It's on their radar, it matters to them. And I think we need to get on board with that and give them these kind of books that can spark the conversations.
Kezia, I think we're so fortunate that that you would agree to join us for this discussion. It would be absolutely brilliant, I think, to hear from your perspective as a head teacher and your education experience generally, you know, where you see this discussion sitting and the impact of it.
I think I think it's fair to say I don't recognise the school in the book, which I think is probably a good thing. But at the same time, I know that they certainly exist. And obviously, Louisa, you alluded to the teacher at Eton with his patriarchy paradox, and the sort of the rage that seemed to instill within that educational establishment. I've always worked at schools where we have had to make the assumption that there will be abuse and misogyny and racism and sexism and homophobia. And we've always worked different schools at different levels in order to tackle that, not just preventative, but to create a very strong narrative that is counter perhaps to a narrative that is coming in from home. And I think ultimately school is only part of the picture. I think it's very easy to say all the education around this particular theme has to be done at school, and making RSE compulsory, hey, that's going to solve everything. Well, you know, my current year 11s, they've been taught consent every year for the last 5 years. Who knows whether it's actually had any impact? And that's real education, isn't it? Whether it has an impact in the rest of their lives. So we know that the attitudes being brought in from home are sometimes contrary to what we would want in school. So we have to create a very, very different narrative. And some of that for me in the schools that I've worked in and led has been around ensuring that there are plenty of really positive male role models, loads of positive role models, full stop, but particularly anti-toxic masculinity role models. And then making sure all the staff both know that it's their collective responsibility to tackle any attitudes that we would deem not to be in line with our values, but also equip them with the skills and the techniques in order to challenge them. And if they're not confident in challenging them, then knowing what they need to do to counter that. So I can give you an example of that. On the first day of the World Cup, I started off the day by saying, you know, it's the World Cup, and I know that there's been some controversy around it being held in Qatar, and talked about some of the homosexuality laws there. After that assembly, one of my male geography teachers was in the corridor making sure the kids were walking sensibly, and children he doesn't teach were making jokey, laddie comments about how they agreed with the approach of Qatar. He didn't know the kids, he didn't have the relationship with them, and also wasn't sure what to say then and there. He said, that's not something to say, but then he immediately reported it on to a senior leader who the next morning in briefing said, you're going to hear these comments, this is what you do to tackle it, and then also did some things in tutor. So I think if you can build a culture within schools where it's more than just assuming, you just have to know it's there. And I think in many ways, the Everyone's Invited website was a little bit counterproductive, because you can say, here are the 3,000 schools named, my school's on it. In fact, my school's on it twice under different names. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that every school in the country isn't on it. Why isn't every single school on it? Because if your school's not on the list, you breathe a sigh of relief and think, doesn't happen here. Well, that doesn't quite work like that. And a whole other range of schools that don't appear on the list very often are special educational needs schools, where perhaps children don't have the abilities to report. And that is concerning, to think these things don't happen in special needs schools. Well, they certainly do. So I think everybody has to not just assume that it happens, but actively go out with very robust strategies to create a counter narrative the entire time. I'm quite glad that the school in the book is not something I recognise, because there was almost nothing in it where I was just thinking, I'm going to sack you. And it's just, it made me ragey. I was thinking, well, I'd have you for that, and I'd have you for that. And some of, that assembly, I just thought, what are you doing? It was just silly, really. So it highlighted for me, just thinking, okay, we're moving on from this, but I know I'm in quite a privileged position where I can build a school that's not like that, and colleagues that have the same priorities as me can build schools like that. It's not easy, and you've got to maintain it, but there are too many children, too many young people in schools that are not like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, Louisa, I wondered, there was the case of Scarlett Mansfield and the campaign she launched about Colchester Royal Grammar School she set up. I mean, it's sort of predated in a way, the whole thing with everyone's invited, but certainly reading about her case made me think about Cassie and her school, and also other cases that I read about, that this whole business of girls which join a school just for the sixth form often happens in the private sector, doesn't it? Or where in Cassie's case it was a girls and boys school merging, and for me it just feels like these girls are being sacrificed. Everybody knows that mixed education is good for boys. But sometimes it feels as if these girls are just a sacrifice. But I'm digressing. But I was going to say, was it that one of the stories that inspired you for activists?
Absolutely, yeah. The Colchester Royal Grammar School, that was made waves, didn't it, in the media? But the thing about the story is, I think most of the things that have happened in the book have happened somewhere in reality, and I didn't have to make much up in terms of the assembly that Kezia mentioned. If you meant the first one, where the head summons everybody up together and says, we're all going to apologize to the girls now for being misogynists. That was something that I read about happened in a school in New Zealand. It wasn't in the UK, but nevertheless, it happened. And I was like, I thought, this is ridiculous. That is no way to create change. How can you pick on every single student and hold them all responsible in that way? And what kind of a message is that sending out? And it's divisive, and it's just nonsensical. So yes, it was. And then the other assembly, where the girls stand up and they try to give their little speech where they're going to draw everyone together against misogyny and sexism and harming one another sexually. I was told about a school where this had happened. In that school, it had gone really well, but of course I needed to provoke more kind of drama and tension in my story. So I imagined, what if it hadn't gone well? What if there'd have been a backlash? Having said that, I've been in schools talking as an author, and I've witnessed really positive things where sixth form girls and boys are going round to lower school classrooms, and they are doing little assemblies in tutor time about these issues and getting the students to respond and engage. And I thought that was really, really positive, and sending out the right message that, the older students are leading, and they're saying, we're going to talk to you about this, and we're going to make it clear where the school stands. So I think there is so much good that's going on to tackle it, but at the same time, as Kezia said, it's very, very difficult to know to what extent that is sticking and staying as a message.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when you've got your 6 hours in the school day, Monday to Friday, 39 weeks a year, and then they go home, and then they're online, and then they're meeting their mates down the sort of the park, and that is a very strong counter narrative, particularly if they're already not particularly inclined to like school very much. So it's got to be more than schools.
Yeah, it definitely has to be. Well, it's a societal change that needs to happen.
Completely. Yeah, and it's
the mail needs to change, doesn't it?
the mainstream media needs to take active steps as well here, as we've all seen just in the past couple of weeks with Jeremy Clarkson and his horrifying comments, and then that kind of the people who say, well, he's a good entertainer, he's a good jokey bloke, it's just banter, and he was only talking about Game of Thrones, it wasn't really, didn't mean it, and these kind of half apologies that he offers. We need that. It should have never have been that article should never have got past an editor, should it? It just shouldn't.
Yeah.
But so whilst there's that out in the public eye for public consumption, and it's a powerful, rich man who is making these statements, and at least he's been sacked from Amazon or whatever shows he was doing, he is punished for it. At least Andrew Tate's currently in prison. Hopefully that's sending out good messages about consequences. But equally, why is that even in the news? And I was reading a paper yesterday, I think, and Catherine Barbles-Singh, I don't know what people's opinions on her are, and she was talking about how wokeness is ruining education and it's just destroying it all, and we need to get this woke out of our top schools because it's damaging the prospects and etc. And again, I thought, why is society, well, we should talk about things, of course we should, but it's when it comes from that really powerful unchallenged voice. There's not a voice answering and saying, well, actually we do need to have multiple views in school, and it can't just be one single story about a road to success. So I think it's the media's got a huge part. So maybe media studies is often maligned, isn't it, as a subject, but I think is actually incredibly valuable. We need to be critical readers. We're teaching our students to be critical readers.
Absolutely, yeah. Across the curriculum, that absolutely applies. I mean, I was very curious, really, how your book was perceived in your own school.
Well, do you know, Joy, I don't think I've talked about it much, because I try to keep my author life and teacher life a little bit separate. And I haven't really got round to talking much about Activist as yet, and sharing it with my colleagues, but I think I will be doing so soon. I think I don't want my teacher to say, oh, it's Mrs. Reed again, all she does is go on about her books. Do you know what I mean? I'm there to teach them their GCSE work and get them through, and make sure that they know that their education is my priority, not my success, if that makes, does that make sense? Yeah,
absolutely. I wondered if it might be that, but I also wondered, because I'm sure you must have lots of fans amongst your students, and that they would, you know, how much came from them wanting to discuss these issues really with you. Did it, you know, whether it's prompted any discussions like that?
I think that we talk all the time about these kind of things because of the texts we teach. We teach in spectacles at year 10, and of course that's heavily about the mistreatment of a woman. I was very interested actually to see a poll on Twitter recently, or a kind of testing of the water by a teacher called Chris Curtis, a thread about misogyny that teachers had witnessed in schools, and there were a lot of replies, but one of them that really fascinated me was a response from a teacher that said, in teaching and in spectacles, a lot of the lads in the class, the boys in the class, say, oh, we love Gerald. Now, Gerald is, to all intents and purposes, a bit of a trafficker, certainly an exploiter. He's not designated exactly a rapist in the same way that Eric is, but they were saying, we like Gerald, he's a lad, he's a G, this kind of language around it. See, being in a girls' school, I don't get that at all. I have complete anti-Gerald, this is horrific. So we are always talking about it, but I don't necessarily see that kind of other perspective that other colleagues would be maybe facing around some of those texts further down the school. But yes, I did ask a lot of my students when the Everyone's Invited stuff came out. I didn't ask them anything personal to them, but is it true? Is this dick pics? Is this a thing? This cyber flashing, I think it's called now. And they're like, yep. You don't want to talk to any of those boys from that school. They are all such anti-feminists. They're awful. They're horrible. You can't get a single person in that school to support you. And I was actually tutoring one of the boys from said school, and he was doing his GCSE English language, and he had to do his talk. And the topic for his talk was why feminism has gone too far. And I thought, yeah, here we go. That's it. Exactly. Here we have perfect specimen. Lovely young man. What, very, very bright, lots of ambition, charming as you like, but this was his view. And this is you know, at a really highly performing boys grammar school. And I thought, yeah, okay, yes, it's evidence, it's the truth of the matter. I don't know, it was just so many things, Joy, that I was observing and experiencing in my own life. My own daughter recently has experienced being stalked by somebody from her college, waiting for her outside school, waiting for her at bus stops, following her home, threatening to kill himself if she doesn't become his girlfriend, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just so much on my mind that I want to do something, and writing is my thing to try to get that across.
I mean, with your English background, Kezia, do you think that books are particularly important in terms of raising issues for discussion? So beyond the curriculum, they have a sort of pastoral role as well?
Oh, absolutely. Which is why it's so important to pick your curriculum very carefully.
Where you have a choice.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I ended up becoming head of English first, because I wanted to be in charge. It's obviously a little bit different when you get to GCSE and A level, but you still have some freedom. Until very recently, I've had a sort of a year 8 class that are not very strong readers, and we've been doing some work together on sort of the Marcus Rashford books, sort of reading aloud. I bought them all a copy, and they all went away and read it over Christmas, because for some of them it was their first book, and you know, and you know, year 8's turning into a bit of a Marcus Rashford year, but he's a strong role model for all of our children, and I serve a very diverse community, and sort of it's obviously mixed, and so I think they've suddenly found something that they can access, and it's not too hard for them, and it's making them feel part of a community and really positive. And that's just one small example. And I've always found, you know, I've been doing this a long time, that you know, you pick your text really carefully and you can really change lives. And I think it's not always this extreme, but it can be. You know, quite some time ago, I had a sort of a GCSE class, and we did To Kill a Mockingbird, and one of the people in that class ended up becoming a lawyer because of it, and is sort of very successful, and is a huge advocate for all sorts of people's rights, and that was the moment. I mean, she talks about it now quite openly. That was the moment, and it's not like it's my book. I mean, it belongs to the world, and possibly the sequel's a little bit problematic, but certainly that book is so incredibly wonderful. And if it happens to one kid per class, let's just keep doing it. And that's why there shouldn't be banned books, and why we shouldn't say, well, we're not going to do that. Everything should be, you know, open and up for discussion about whether it's included, and what works in my school will not work in somebody else's school, and it won't work with another child. I mean, one of the most depressing holidays I've ever had was when I took my 15-year-old to the battlefields of World War I, and she just wanted to sit in the back with a phone, and it was just like, this is where all this happened. She was not bothered. Do you know what I mean? And it's that different text for different people, but it can make a huge difference to somebody's life, and we've just got to keep selling that. We've got to get away from the idea that the subject of English is about 2 GCSEs and then maybe an A level. It's so much more rich than that, and we've got to celebrate it, and we've got to, you know, really hold on to that. I think the GCSEs killing the subject, to be honest, but that's probably for another day.
Possibly, yeah. But I mean, I think that probably highlights also the importance of the school library and the whole wider reading for pleasure agenda. that reading is so important to the development of empathy, and empathy is what is at the basis of this, you know, lack of empathy, isn't it, which allows misogyny and those sort of toxic attitudes to flourish. So I mean, what are your views on school libraries? And
well, they couldn't be more important, really. I'm so lucky that we have a library in my school, and I know there are schools where that has disappeared, and I feel desperately sad about that, and can't understand why it's not funded by the government as an essential aspect of every single school there is. We prioritise reading for pleasure throughout school, and really emphasize its benefits, in not just academically but emotionally, and in all the ways that make you a human being who will have a rich and fulfilling life. And for me, it's the habit of reading was instilled from a very early age, and the love of reading was instilled from a very early age. And I hope we can still get readers, you know, involved who haven't got that by teen years, or it's waning out a little bit. And there's such a rich variety of text, isn't there, available for young people now, and it's finding the right ones for the right student, as Kezia said, the book that will spark the passion, the love, and the addiction to a really, really good book. So I know that school librarians and library workers doing a phenomenal job in supporting that across the country, and all authors that I know are firmly in their debt for that. I think with the way I write with young adult verse novels is particularly hopefully for that reader who thinks, well, I don't want to read because books are boring and they take forever and I'm never going to finish this, so what's the point in even starting? It's the speed with which you turn the pages, the brevity, the white space. There's so much opportunity there for a reluctant reader to feel a sense of achievement and accomplishment. Oh, look, I just sat down for 10 minutes and I've read 50 pages. Yes, I can actually get into this. And the story will be an exciting one that moves and has drama and is about things that matter to me. So, yeah, I think that school librarians are just, and library staff are just phenomenal, and it's essential for building empathy. That it's the old cliche, but it's there for a reason. The idea of the windows and the doors, and that mirrors, windows and doors, as you said, that they need to see themselves and glimpse other lives, and then step into those shoes, like Atticus Finch says, until you've walked a mile in someone else's shoes, you never know what they're going through. And that's what hopefully these books can enable. It would be incredible if a young man who had some fixed ideas about girls and what they are or deserve or their value read my book and change their mind about that. That's something that I don't know if it's even possible, but that would be the ultimate dream, really.
What do you think, Kezia?
I think libraries are a really expensive resource and we have to prioritise them. Schools should be funded better. We've still got our library. It's a room that I could use for a classroom because we're kind of out of space. It's an expensive salary to keep replacing the books. It's expensive, but it matters, so let's do it. It's a safe space. It's there after school. It's there at lunchtime, and because it is so safe, we have a full-time student counsellor, and her office is just off the library. So the sort of it's when I'm not saying that the librarian picks things up when they happen, but certainly children gravitate there when they might be feeling most vulnerable, and I think that's important. But also for some of our children that are most vulnerable, when they come out of those sessions, they're in the library. And they're in this world of books, and it becomes more normal, and it becomes somewhere where they're visiting on a regular basis. Not everyone's going to have the opportunity to do that, but it's certainly something I'm prioritising in the budget, and it's something, you know, I think all heads get pressure about. You know, you could save £50,000, £60,000 a year by not having one, to be honest. but it's worth it. How, you know, if you think, you know, if you can engage those children in reading for life and pleasure, and the sort of residual impact on their academic sort of outcomes, and their contribution to the world of tax later on, you know, it's a good investment. So you just got to be sort of looking at the long game for it.
That's music to our ears, isn't it, Tricia?
Totally and utterly music to our ears. I mean, I've been saying exactly the same thing for many, many years, more than I care to remember. But it is finding heads who are willing to give that resource and give that priority to it. But it makes such a difference to people who perhaps might not be touched in class, but would be quite happy to sit in a corner and read. I know I was one of them. And you know, reading created my life. I adored it. Yeah.
So presumably librarians are included in all your sort of staff training around safeguarding and disclosures, and because I think it is quite a common occurrence really that the library is considered as sort of almost a neutral safe space, where, I mean, I've heard it described, the library is the only place where you're not actually assessed, and you can have a relationship with an adult who isn't assessing you, who isn't marking you, and so that could be the person you feel comfortable with in terms of making disclosures and things. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of hidden values, aren't there, around a school library, but it's really brilliant to hear a head teacher saying they're prepared to put their money where it counts and can see those, you know, all the advantages beyond, you know, it's beyond sums and cost benefit analysis, really, isn't it? Yeah. I know, Michelle, you had some burning questions about this issue that you wanted to give, so do chip in.
I'm trying not to enrage myself again, so I've only just calmed down. I think I just wanted to flag a couple of questions that people had sent in advance. Alison from Maidenhead, I think I mentioned this before the session actually, works in a boys' school, wants to know how she can foster empathy, respect and understanding with the boys and young men in her school. So do you guys have any tips on other kind of suggested reading, or how you can use these books to support boys, particularly in becoming allies and fostering empathy? I know that we've got some chaps on the delegates joining us this evening as well, so I think it's just important, you know, how can we support that conversation and that understanding and positive action from a, you know, within that male community. What are your thoughts? Start with Louisa and then go to Kezia.
Can I just say we've got a question from Emma here as well. It's very aligned with that. She's saying, do you have any strategies for overcoming toxic behaviours taught at home? I work in a deprived area and I'm constantly shocked by the racist, sexist, bullying attitudes from young children. And I think that sort of ties quite closely with what you were just asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge questions, aren't they? I think for an all boys school, how can those young men be kind of engaged with the girls' experience and understand it and want to do their bit as allies? That's so important. It's maybe about forging connections with a local girls' school, or within, you know, these the context of a reading group, a book group discussion, or coming together to think about ways that they can impact and help within their communities to raise the profile of this and offer new other ways for looking at things. One of the I thought was really interesting, a question that was really interesting to ask students is, and it's something that Laura Bates writes about in her book, Fix the System, Not the Woman. She talks about how she went into a girls' school, or a mixed school actually, and she said to the students she was talking to, who were only 13, 14-year-olds, she said, guess how your lives would be different if you were a different sex? What is it about your life that would be changed? And that produced absolutely fascinating, very, very sad as well, responses from the girls in particular that the boys listened to and understood and saw things slightly different. Just those small moments that help to shift perspective and develop empathy. So one of the 13-year-old girls said if she were a boy, she wouldn't have to be scared all the time. And I think that's such a powerful and deeply moving thing for the boys to hear and reflect on. So possibly by dialogue and opening up that dialogue and discussion, and through reading and books like Activist or Laura Bates, or who also writes YA actually, and there's lots of other young adult books around, they can open up those kind of conversations. Well, what would you do if you were in this situation and you saw this boy doing that to this girl? How would you intervene? What would be the right way to go about that? Or could you? Why? If you feel you couldn't, why not? So I think that book groups could facilitate those kind of discussions happening. And hopefully in a way that's non-confrontational, because you're not saying, well, it's you and it's your fault. You're looking at these fictional characters who are acting in a particular way, and reflecting on their actions and hopefully seeing ways through that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the second question. It doesn't really answer the second question about the strategies that have been embedded from coming through from home. How do we look at that? I think I need to think a bit more about that, but it could be involving those students in those kinds of discussions and reflecting on fictional characters and reacting. Of course, as I've just said, that doesn't always end in the result you want. I talked about one of my books, Wrecked, in a school, which is about from a boy's perspective, and he's the recipient of some really unpleasant behavior from a girl, but he's a really sweet, loving, kind, romantic lad, but he's also, lots of things that boys like. He's a footballer, he's one of the lads, he's got lots of mates, he's popular, etc. And I talked to them about this section where, oh look, Joe's doing his best to please Imogen, his girlfriend, but she's not treating him very well. How would you respond to this? And some of the boys were just like, well, Joe's a simp. And that's that word, isn't it, that comes from that incel kind of culture to describe a boy who is showing too much weakness or softness or too much emotion. And how do we tell boys that actually feminism benefits them as well, that those kind of qualities of empathy and emotion and caring, and those are all really great things that they want and need in their lives? Do they really want just a life of kind of being closed off to other people and to human connection? I'm sure they don't. So I think whatever we can do to say that intimacy, emotion, reciprocity, and finding, comfort and solace in others is to the good, but finding those ways through is the tough bit, isn't it?
Kezia?
I don't think one lone female member of staff in an all-boys school will be able to affect anything radical by themselves, because it has to be absolutely every person all the time, and it needs to be a very conscious crafting of an alternative narrative. And I think what some of the I don't like to name him, but the one that's currently in prison, what draws young men in is that about 80% of what he says seems totally reasonable. So the other 20% must be reasonable too. So it's not creating a narrative where this person, everything that they say is wrong and you must hate it. It's saying, well, yeah, maybe he has got a point here and maybe he has got a point here. However, and this is the bit that's not okay. And you need everybody on that page. You need everybody to be really proactive about it. It's when you overhear something, and it's not just about sexism and misogyny. It's about racism. It's about transphobia. It's about making sure that every school is a safe space for every single person, regardless of who they are at that particular moment or who they are possibly becoming as they get a little bit older. And in terms of a particularly disadvantaged community, I serve a very disadvantaged community in the Black country, and I've served other communities, and what I'd say is sometimes some communities are better at hiding some attitudes and what they bring in, because they know what they can get away with. And I think regardless of the attitudes they've got at home, and it could be a really negative attitude towards women or towards people of colour or towards learning in itself, or all sorts of other things, you have to create again a narrative in the school that this is actually what it is, and this is where you can be happy, and this is where you can be successful. The minute you start making people, particularly children, feel like the other and the naughty ones, they will find like-minded people to self-validate. And I think that's what happens. And certainly the boys in Louisa's book, they self-validate. They're all kind of low, you know, jokey, and they're kind of like slapping one another and joking with one another. And, you know, and clearly those attitudes are validated at home. You know, they, you know, and what you have to do is just say, right, it's not okay, and I'm going to break this up, but I'm going to make you feel included in a different kind of culture that is very different. And maybe they don't accept it at that moment. Maybe, you know, at age 16 or 18, they might move on, and you think, well, I've not won that one. But who knows, 5 years, 10 years down the line, they could be raising their children in a different way and with different attitudes because they've seen it done a different way. And I think I've seen that happen more than once. And you just think, oh, I wasn't expecting that. That's kind of come from the side. And I think, again, it's playing the long game and not thinking that if they leave you with a particular attitude, they're stuck with it forever.
I mean, I think
that's a hopeful attitude, isn't it?
I'm not normally this positive on a Wednesday afternoon.
I was quite impressed. I thought, yeah, that's good. That's hopeful. Somebody's written here, Game Changer by Neil Schusterman writes from different viewpoints while protagonist lives parallel lives and is shocked by the difference. Carol, I'm in a borough-wide librarian network where recently a librarian at a local all-boys school said she can't flag up LGBT plus books as they tend to get damaged or removed.
Keep buying more.
Don't give up. I mean, in terms of you know, the long game, I honestly think that you know, providing we're starting young, and there's been such a tremendous, beautiful flowering of picture books which are inclusive and showing all, you know, all ranges of life and genders and you know, if that continues, because you see the flourishing of publishing in middle grade as well as YA, you know, children who have grown up seeing all these things in an inclusive, you know, comforting way, hopefully by the time they get to be teenagers, there will be a bit of a difference, but it, you know, it is a long game. But it's one that I think, you know, authors from all sectors are definitely trying to do their bit to change the world, aren't they? Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, I think Carol perhaps should take hope from the idea that if they're being removed, they maybe being removed by people who actually need to read them and are validated by seeing themselves in those books. So it might not all be negative.
Oh, absolutely. It's I mean, you know, bless her, my librarian goes bonkers trying to get kids to bring their books back in. They sign up and they just vanish. And it's like, look, and she'll send me a report, said there's £10,000 worth of books are missing. And it's like, well, we'll buy some new ones, because if they're at home and they're being read, they're being cherished, then that's great. And I think you have to, you know, I mean, I joined my school 4.5 years ago, and lots of these attitudes were really embedded. Last year, we had a trans boy as our head student, and no one blinked an eyelid. Absolutely no one. And you know, it becomes the new normal. And maybe those books go out. I mean, it might be different if you're seeing a leadership team are taking them away. And then I would say, is that really where you want to be working? But again, that's another reason why I don't think you can leave safeguarding and checking that safeguarding is happening in schools to Ofsted, because for some of them, how many years in between are they going? And they should be going every year. And I've talked repeatedly. I mean, if you see me anywhere else, you hear that I think it should be a yearly safeguarding audit the same way. I mean, our finances are audited yearly and I have to pay for it. And I think safeguarding is more important than the money. I mean, it's kind of important, but, you know, it's more important than that. Why isn't someone going in every year and seeing, you know, have you got these books in the library? Is your curriculum right? Are you being taught this? What is the atmosphere like? Are you dealing with bullying? What is, you know, what's it like talking to the children every year? I mean, I'd say all the time anyway, but you can't do that. But why are we leaving it? For some of these schools, they haven't been inspected in 10 years more. And then Ofsted are going in and they're going, do you know what, your educational outcomes are wonderful, your reputation is wonderful, but oh my gosh, your safeguarding is atrocious. The personal development of your children has been neglected because all that matters is the headline percentage. It's too important. You know, schools are there for the outcomes, but we also have a responsibility to develop the whole child and look after them while they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what society needs. We need humans. We need human beings being considerate and careful of each other, definitely. You had another question, I think, Michelle, that came in advance.
I think that was, where are we? Lizzie Dorking, just asking how books and libraries can contribute and help with the development of empathy and just dealing with topics such as the stuff that we're talking about this evening. So the role of the library, I think, I'm a big supporter of, I love librarians. Libraries are brilliant. They're the most important resource in a school. Well, often we kind of do lots of work and donate books to libraries and try to support with all this kind of, all the stuff that we do, Joy, with, you know, with regards to empathy and reading for pleasure. But yeah, I think libraries are a safe space, aren't they? And they can provide a sanctuary, but also just a brilliant way to tackle some of these really, really difficult subjects. So I'm wondering, so the question is really, how can books and libraries and librarians help to support? So I don't know if anybody's got any examples of work that they're doing as a librarian or we're in their school where they're using books or, you know, the library to support with some of these issues that we're talking about this evening. It's really difficult, isn't it? Because it's really quite emotive, isn't it? Some of the topics.
Yeah, I wondered, Katie, you've talked about how you've built this culture within your school. Did you have any sort of book-based initiatives that helped you build that culture?
We have probably not entire books, to be honest, because that gets a little bit expensive. And you know, I've got a great assistant head teacher that leads on reading across the curriculum, and with our PSHE curriculum, whatever we're teaching in that particular time on a Monday during their sort of extended full time, they have some joint reading that everyone in the school reads, and it will be around whatever the topic is. So at the moment we're doing consent, so she's been finding something appropriate for that sort of interdisciplinary reading to make sure that happens. In terms of, you know, making sure that libraries stay relevant, you need really knowledgeable librarians about what's out there, and then you need to ask the children what they want to read about. What, you know, maybe not read about, but what they want to learn about, what they want to find out more about. Sometimes the word read terrifies them. Thinking about my year 8 class in particular, you know, the first few lessons when we said we're going to read, and they were like, you know, it's just like this panic, and now they kind of sort of look forward to it. But what do they want to find out about? And then using that knowledge to find a huge range of resources for them. And I think that you have to be quite agile and you have to be quite knowledgeable and be able to move quite quickly with that. And you need to champion it. I mean, you know, maybe my school's lucky that I'm an English teacher and we'll be banging on about that forever. Not everybody has an English teacher as a head teacher, you know, but you know, that's, I'm sure there's lots of people that will celebrate it and value it as well.
I think you go into other schools, don't you, Louisa, with your author hat on. I wonder if you have any sort of anecdotes about where you felt you were being used to generate discussion around issues, or
so as I mentioned before about talking about RECT, the school specifically asked me to come and speak about domestic violence or violence between peer-on-peer abuse, and in relation to that text and that sort of toxic relationships, rather than toxic masculinity, it was much more toxic relationships and how they can escalate and explore the way fiction can help us understand different perspectives on that. So, but that was to it was a good visit, but it was to a huge hall full of year 10 students, and it's a lot to talk about on kind of en masse, isn't it? I do think massive assemblies definitely have their place to raise issues and make them on the kind of school agenda, but sometimes when you're talking like that to a massive bunch of 200 kids or whatever, it's difficult to get that kind of sincerity from them back if there's a lot of kind of grandstanding from the boys in the audience, and the girls seem very quiet comparatively. So it was an interesting one actually, but tricky to do. But I always enjoy going into schools to talk about my books, because you never know what questions you're going to get. You never know what they're going to come out with. And young people are just continually hilarious in many ways. Things like, are you giving those books away for free? No. Is there a raffle for those books at the end? No. It's just funny and fun, and that's a huge part of it, that it should be fun and enjoyable for them, and they should feel that this is interesting and relevant. But at the same time, we want to make, I think, an impact with the material as well. So perhaps it's easier sometimes when it's a smaller group to talk about something that's such a huge issue, such as toxic relationships. I think that last week I took my year 8s to the library because I'm just so keen for them all to get back on the reading horse, and the things they're interested in are fascinating. I was bombarded with, get me a good book about anti-Semitism, get me a good book about autism. And it's just, as you said, you need this skilled librarian who has that knowledge of the text, who can say, yeah, we've got this new one in and this is great, and try this. If you have read this one, you'll like this one too. And I do my best with that, but our librarian's lovely, and she's very good as well with recommendations. But I'd love it if I think more colleagues were really invested in children's literature. I know my head is like Kezia, she's a massive fan of and reader, so she's really invested in it. But I think it's getting that knowledge across the board. But teachers have so much to do. How can we get them reading children's lit as well? I'm not sure, but it's something that's valuable.
It's hard enough when you're a librarian who is interested in children's lit, keeping up with children's lit. So, you know,
it's hard. It's so hard.
Yeah.
But that's why, I mean, one of the things I'm involved with is the UKLA and the UKLA Book Awards. They're the only national book awards judged by teachers, and the whole thinking behind that is engaging and involving teachers with reading for pleasure and reading young children and young people's literature, and the impact it has on those teachers that we see year on year on year, and the impact stays with the schools they teach in. I mean, it's if only, I think, people would realise what it would do for them more generally. It does something for you as an individual. You know, all reading is rewarding for you as an individual, but it also changes how you are in school and your attitudes to reading for pleasure.
Absolutely, but we're talking again about schools, and I know that this is the audience, and we're talking about libraries, and we're talking about
yeah.
But how can we turn some of these parents into born-again readers?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question.
If it's happening in the home, it's going to happen. I mean, sometimes you've just got to hope that it happens with the next generation, that, you know, one of the students leaves you to become a parent in the future and they will read with their children. But it's staggering the number of children that are not read to as children by parents, you know, and so how can we reverse that, really? Because I think that would be quite revolutionary.
Definitely.
I think that's one of the most tragic, sad things about the government being prepared to stand by and allow public libraries to be closed, because public libraries are where you reach out into families, and often the outreach we used to do in public libraries around young children learning to read and young children reading is that it would be a family reading project, because you often get non-reading parents who can be drawn in by going to a library with their children. Yeah, so the situation is getting worse from that point of view, isn't it? Although there was a great boost, I think, during lockdown, when the availability, you know, libraries were an e-book lifeline for so many people who were, you know, locked at home on their own. And I think it did change some attitudes to reading. I mean, we've got some comments, haven't we, about reading groups and schools librarian groups and things, which
it's been quite interesting. Some people saying that the library service has too few librarians to come into school. Others saying that school library service can help with book talks. I suggested networking partnerships with other schools, because each librarian has different skills and they can exchange those skills in a general meeting. And then the person who raised this issue says that they're fortunate they do have a borough librarian group and arrange various activities, so it's already happening. It's great. I mean, this is the joy about librarians. They are usually very, very on the ball and are in there doing what you're thinking would be nice to do. So it's great. It's why I love them all.
Yeah. So I can't believe how quickly this time is passing. So I think I'm very conscious that I want to give both of you an opportunity, you know, for your top tips, really, top tips for raising awareness within your school about these issues. Obviously, Kezia has been very successful with the culture in her school. So top tips for how she did it, how she got there. Top tips for engaging those members of staff who seem very negative about listening to those things. Top tips about engaging the population in reading. I mean, have either of you had experience of the whole school reading, the single book whole school thing, either in your schools or across city, you know, a city read or anything like that? So top tips really for our audience.
Can I add one in here from one of our delegates? Secondary school they keep picture books, encourage students to read to young children, but they do this at the same time as saying they don't read themselves. But they've also started Key Stage 3 library lessons, which has a picture book project looking back at their reading histories. So I think that's fascinating that the kids are saying they don't read, but they've got a history of reading. And that seems to be a brilliant idea. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, I absolutely love that. I think that's amazing. The connecting across the school. I love the thought of a single book that the whole school reads. I think that's such a super idea. I've never been in a school that's done that, but I can see that working really, really well to create conversations. And the enthusiasm we're doing this year for World Book Day and World Book Week. We're doing big book swaps. That's fun as well. And I think we're doing kind of gimmicky things, not the dressing up where you come into school, but like a little photo booth where you can come and have a quick shot, you're this character or whatever. I think there's lots of fun things you can do in that sense. Guess the shelfie thing, guess the books, which staff member is this bookshelf belonging to. So that's fun and raise the profile. I find that when I'm in a lesson and someone says to me, "Oh, we're going to this play for drama and we don't know the story of it. Can you tell us the story?" And I have to launch into partway through my lesson on Macbeth or whatever to give the full plot of A Streetcar Named Desire or Othello or something like that. And that kind of oral storytelling is always really powerful. You get them like hanging on your every word. And in primary schools, children are read aloud to for play pleasure and the enjoyment. And I know there will be work that comes from that as well, but just that chance to share great stories for the pure pleasure of it, and taking away that kind of, as you said before, I'm being tested on this, I'm being assessed on this, just that building that in somehow to form time, curriculum time. Lots of schools, I think, have that as part of their registration period, silent reading or sharing a book with their form tutor. But if that was more widespread, I think it would have an impact. Or even if the teacher was kind of always coming to the class, or sometimes coming to the class with their favourite book that they're reading, and let's talk about this, why it's so great. The passion, enthusiasm that an adult can infect the pupil, can't it? So those would be my tips. Just get passionate about it. Don't be afraid to be a geek out about your favorite books, nerdy about it all. And there was an article this week in the news about how people with lots of books are just show-offs and snooting. And what nonsense! I've never read anything more absurd my whole life. It's not about show, it's about loving something wonderful. And if we can get that across, then that would be my top tip.
Lovely, thank you. Kezia?
And I think if it's important to you, if it's genuinely important to you, you have to accept the reality of what it is in your particular context. And then you have to very deliberately involve everybody in creating the environment that you want. And occasionally you'll find somebody that kind of fights against it. But I've never worked in a school where they've actively fought against it. They might be a little bit reticent, or I'm not sure about that, but you just got to keep going and just keep smiling at them. You don't have to make a big fight out of it. You don't have to make any threats or anything. Just keep smiling and just keep going. And you've got to be relentless and you've got to be positive. And this is the way it's going to be. And if this isn't the place for you, then we're in a recruitment and retention crisis. Someone down the road wants you, and you just go absolutely, this is the school that we are creating, and I am not compromising on it. And I think that is just what you got to do. And if you're not in that environment at the moment, find somewhere new where you can fight the good fight, because otherwise, I've worked at places that have made me miserable, and they do make you miserable. So find somewhere where you can contribute to the fight you want to make, because it's all exhausting, isn't it? You might as well be up for the right fight and exhausted than fighting the wrong fight or fighting alone. I don't know what I'm talking about. There's probably too much fighting talk for Wednesday.
Fighting.
I know, but at the same time, make some hot chocolate and have a biscuit, and do it with a big smile on your face, and charm them into submission. Just don't take no for an answer. Maybe I'm a bit sort of pig-headed like that, but it's too important. My daughter comes to my school. I'm not letting her go to a school that's horrible. Do you know what I mean? It's just not happening. And if everybody approached every school that way, it would be different.
Yeah, I feel like that from the perspective, obviously when I was a parent it was with my children, but it's grandchildren now. And I've got a girl coming up to 10, so I'm getting increasingly worried and thinking, what can we do? There's been some really great links put in the chat that I just wanted to flag up. I think from Dawn Woods, she mentioned first Empathy Lab, and obviously all the activities and resources and the publicity about that has been so powerful. But also the Cheltenham Festival, teachers reading groups, and obviously of course the Open University Teachers as Readers. Their reading groups all around the country are having a real impact. And Josie has just put a comment in. She's a school librarian about to start a staff YA book club, which sounds brilliant, where we'll all read and discuss the same book. So that's like a small scale all school reading thing. And she has regular Key Stage 3-4 library lessons where they promote fiction with current themes. So Andrew Tate is in the news, so I show students activists, she says. Hooray, that's great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Would anybody like to win a free copy of Louisa's book? I think I'm going to assume that's again. It's not audience participation. So I've got
You've
3
definitely
copies.
got a yes. Yes.
That was a yes. It's a
Yes,
yes.
yes, yes, yes.
People are saying yes, yes, yes. Good. Okay,
Yes.
nobody's saying no thanks, I don't want that. Okay, so I've numbered you all that are on the call. So I'm going to just get between 1 and 29. Louisa, do you want to pick a number that I have allocated to? Just pick a random number.
19.
Where are we? Linda Graham.
Oh,
And then Kezia, so not 19, but between 1 and 29. Give me a number.
Sorry, I muted myself. 6.
Christine Lockwood. And then Joy, do you want to pick another one? So between 1 and 29, not 6 or 19.
12.
Sue Donnelly. Right, brilliant. So I shall be buying those from Guppy Books because we support independent bookstores and independent businesses. So I will get those signed copies for you, and then I will forward them on. So I'm assuming that we've got your email addresses. I'll drop you all an email to get your postal addresses. So we will order those and get those sent out to you as a thank you for coming along and joining in. Thank you from me, obviously, for everybody that's you know, signed in and tuned in and contributed to all the chat. Hopefully you found it really useful and stimulating and got some really, really good ideas. Thank you, as always, to Tricia and Joy for all of their librarian expertise and just general amazing literature knowledge. Thanks to Louisa, obviously, for writing such a brilliant book that got me so angry and energized and motivated and frustrated and all of those other good things that good books should do when I was rereading it over the weekend. And thanks massively to Kezia, who's obviously given up her time to contribute her thoughts and experiences. I think it's been really, really useful to have your input as a head teacher dealing with all of these kind of issues on a daily basis. I mean, we could be here all night, couldn't we? But we're not going to be. We're going to finish in a second. Feel free to kind of give us your comments and feedback. I will make sure that we send the slides and the recording and the resource list. Anything else that we think would be useful as kind of signposting, I'll make sure that you get that. It'll be possibly not tomorrow, it'll be in the next 2 days before the end of the week, because we need to sort this recording into a format that we can share. So I'll get those all out to you. We're all on Twitter. I'll send you all of our hashtags and sort of, what do they call them, handles, is it? And you can all follow us. We've got lots of other exciting author events coming up, but yeah, thanks ever so much for everybody for being involved this evening. Hopefully you found it useful, and yeah, enjoy your books to the people that have gained some free books. So we'll see you again another time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.